Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to ISG Smart Series webinar, where today we're going to be talking about the power of place. I'm Richard Hubbard, Chief Marketing Officer at ISG, and today we'll be exploring the impact of human behaviour on the workplace and what this means for businesses and their people in a post-COVID-19 era. So before I introduce the panel, a few words from me. Firstly, a quick introduction from ISG. ISG, for those of you that don't know, we're a global construction services company. Very proud to say, as of the week before last, we're Building Magazine's major contractor of the year. And we specialise, and you may well know us for fit out, particularly in the office sector. And then what we call engineering services as well, and that's particularly a global service, something we do in continental Europe, which is hyperscale data centres, high-tech manufacturing facilities, laboratories, science and health facilities, and then also in the UK, a general construction business, but with a real specialism in major projects and also increasingly in the public sector. So we've got a really proud legacy of delivering workplaces across a range of client sectors. So I think we know a thing or two about workplaces, and we've got a great panel that bring a number of different perspectives to us today. So and we've all seen in the light of the pandemic, a real change in human behaviour related to workplace, and that's what we're going to talk to today. And it's certainly disrupted the way we all operate as businesses. So we're going to be exploring how we, as a community with a connection to workplace, how we can all respond to the emerging challenges. And also, I think there are some opportunities that this presents for all of us. So that's going to be the broad topic. This afternoon, we'll be discussing the findings from a research report that ISG produced called The Power of Place, fittingly enough, where we reached out to employees, thousands of employees across a range of sectors from financial services all the way through to healthcare. The report really reflected the combined surveys, and we actually did the first one immediately prior to the pandemic hitting, so right at the start of this year, and then we did another survey, a follow-up one in September of this year. So really interesting to get those two perspectives, and certainly it's fair to say that the findings from the survey, they did highlight the growing appeal of flexible working, and then a shift in sentiment really around workplace to some degree. And I think it's true to say that many companies have actually seen an upswing in productivity, even though employees have spent less time in the workplace. But then there is definitely a flip side to that, and I think the novelty of flexible working at the start, maybe we're now starting to see the flip side, and that came out more in the second survey. And I think my conclusion, without going into the detail, would be we've discovered that the new ways of working are certainly not universally loved. So we can look at that a bit today. Obviously, employers who are looking to promote this sense of belonging among their top talent, they're going to need to respond by creating spaces that actually post-COVID really do represent good value. And one of the things we want to talk about today is how businesses, placemakers and the construction industry can come together to do this. And so that'll be part of the topic that we cover today. So before I introduce the panel, just how this afternoon is going to run will be, at the beginning, we'll have a panel discussion, and I've got some questions for the panel that I will pose, but then actually what we're going to do is open up to all of you the ability to ask questions. So they'll be coming up in my chat panel on my screen. And you may well have other wider topics than people on the panel, haven't thought about or haven't discussed. So please do send those through. If for any reason we can't get to your question today, of course, we'd love to stay in touch. You can email us at email@isgltd.com. So please do, if you'd like to continue the conversation beyond that. And now I'll introduce the panel. So I'm absolutely delighted. We've got a really sort of good broad range of people, all with their own areas of expertise. And I think that will really make for a rich discussion today. So firstly, we have Suzannah Nichol. Hi, Suzannah.
Hi, Richard.
Hi. Suzannah is the Chief Executive of Build UK. And for any of you that have been in the industry going through what we've been through due to the pandemic, Build UK have done an absolutely A-grade job at pulling the industry together. I've certainly attended some of those calls, and never before has our industry collaborated in the way it has during the pandemic. And that's largely thanks to Build UK and the way that they brought us all together to share best practice, and long may that continue. And then our second panelist is Caroline Pontifex, and Caroline is Director of Workplace Experience at KKS Savills, and she leads their occupier and workplace strategy team. Hi, Caroline.
Hello there, Richard. Good afternoon.
Afternoon. And I'm hoping, Caroline, you know, what you'll bring is that broad experience of working with lots and lots of different companies who are all going through this at the moment. So it'd be really good to see what you've got to say as we get into the questions. And then thirdly, we've got Phil Hobbins. Hi, Phil.
Hi, Richard.
Hi. And Phil is a workplace construction projects director for property and facility services at BT. And Phil's actually got very broad experience globally across 3 continents. So Phil, I think today I'm really looking forward to you both bringing in that global perspective, but also that insider perspective of what it's like to work in a large company in charge of workplace at this time. So looking forward to your contribution today. And then very lastly, but not least, is ISG's very own Lee Phillips, and Lee is Managing Director of ISG's Fit Out business, and many of you may know our business is the #1, if you like, workplace fit out contractor, office fit out contractor in London. So welcome, Lee.
Thanks, Richard. Hi all.
Hi. So thank you all for joining us today. So I'm gonna kick off with some questions of my own now. And the first one is really around lessons learned from this year. So for me, if this year's taught us anything, it's the importance of place and connectivity and supporting our well-being and social needs. And I'm thinking about, you know, so many people working from home now, and how do we create workplaces and environments that are going to actually attract people back from their homes and make them see that there's real value in coming back into the workplace, value for them as individuals and their broader communities. And I think, Lee, if I start with you on that question.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. You know, I think it's fair to say that we all recognise that some of the costs and the benefits of spending less time in the workplace. But whilst we've all had different experiences this year and been so varied, I think as employers, we've had to acknowledge our responsibility to support our people's well-being and safety, both now and in the future. I think rather than put together a one glove, one size fits all approach, I think we need to find a blend between remote working and office working. I think one of the things we've seen, certainly from the research, you can see something on the screen here, is that the primary reason employees are against working from home 100% of the time is generally they will have a lack of contact, they'll have the sense of team and losing sense of a work-life distinction. So the research that today's talent pool want to be immersed in is their company's brand and identifying what that brand looks like. So I think it's important to create environments that articulate a brand's values and their visions of where their company is going in the future. With its hard and physical office, without that, it's really hard to put a stamp on it in terms of what that bigger picture looks like. So coming to a close, I guess, Richard, our data shows that significantly more people have spent some days in the workplace during the pandemic, said they feel generally proud to work for their business and their organisation, compared to those who have worked permanently at home, I guess. So on the flip side, Those who have worked from home and remotely over the last 9 months have stated that fewer days in the workplace is optimal for their overall well-being, which is a key consideration in terms of what we're really finding about our people and in the industry. So in summary, what this indicates to me is that the role of the physical workplace certainly goes beyond capacity function, and a blend of office and remote working is really key to moving forward. And the workplace won't strictly be where business is done as usual, 5 days a week, but it will be a space where we collaborate, we connect with people, and it will be an experience really for not only the employer, but more importantly, Richard, for the employees.
That's great, thanks, Lee, and that makes perfect sense. And I think the right thing to do, Phil, is probably to come on to you and just get an insider view of what it's like for a major employer like BT and the plans you've got for coming out of COVID-19.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I think it's safe to say that BT have been on a very expedited process over the last 9 months or so. Consider we'd started on a transformation programme about this time last year. We had certain plans around how we implement that transformation of our workplace, because BT needs to change. As you can see, the lovely branding at the back here. We're changing the face of how BT does business and how it works for our customers better, more agility, more flexibility, and that's certainly the theme that we're starting to create within those workplaces that we're creating. Definitely the obvious statements being that we need to radically change how we do things. We need to balance the smart working that we have, with our, with the home, the office, or the satellite. We need to ensure that we ease that post-COVID anxiety that's certainly apparent at the moment. Less one-to-one, more task-based, or doing at home. And creating, the creativity as a product is becoming more apparent with us in the office. And how do we create those spaces? We've tagged things, moments that matter, where it's the we space, the me space, with the relax and refuel and able to collaborate within those. Almost that open desk solutions coming in as the obvious statement, and the one-to-one desking has almost been eradicated, becoming a bit of a dinosaur now in terms of how we will do work. So we're having to consider all of those options at the moment. So dare I say, the neurodiversity, the inclusion. But we have to be inspiring, inviting. We've got to, encourage people to come back to the office, give them, the home comforts that they've been used to recently. That hospitality, the sustainable environments that they can allow them to, have, a change in culture, because we can't, just ask people to change without giving them the products to change their culture. And a word we've been using quite recently is around, in the office, is serendipity. That moment of chance. And I think, having fun again, I think, is one of the things that we've sort of lost, is, the sort of one-to-one engagement, in a safer environment, in a more, friendly environment, where we can deal with the problem solving, the creating ideas, which has become a little bit impossible for certain things, particularly in the world of BT. So look, development, and that's what we're developing over this time now. We've expedited some of our programme to encourage those working practices. And ISG are obviously at the forefront with us at the moment, with the HQ and BT being the first one out of the blocks. Still a lot to learn though.
Yeah, no, that I mean, all of that definitely rings true, but on a personal level, it is what I miss from being in the office, is that bumping into someone, having that chance conversation, and a good idea coming from that. And so I guess, Caroline, with that kind of you consulting across that broad set of employers, what Phil has said, does that kind of ring true with you, and is that something you're seeing as a broader picture?
Absolutely, and it resonates very strongly. So the clients that we are working with are all the same questions coming up time and time again, is, well, what do we need the office space for in the future? How are we going to use it? How should we design it? How should we modify what we've got and repurpose for a future way of working? And we're seeing, I think from your data suggested that the aspiration for the employees coming back into the workforce is to come back a proportion of their time into the workplace, rather not workforce, but proportion of their time into the workplace, probably somewhere, depending on the organisation, between 40 and 60% of the week in a physical work environment, and then the rest of the time working from home. So the question then for us as workplace providers is, how do we allow that space to flex? How do we allow it to cope with the ebbs and flows of potentially a risk of everybody wanting to come in on the same day, and in leaving the sort of tumbleweed Fridays and Mondays where the place is empty. So those are the challenges that we're seeing, and we're seeing different approaches. Different sectors are taking different approaches. Some smaller organisations are already broaching the idea of time sharing with other firms and coming in, bringing their teams together completely 2-3 days a week, and then they're dispersing, and then the space gets shared by another organisation. And we saw, I think last week, we saw the first deal that was brokered like that, of two organisations sharing the same office space, which I think is interesting. And then we're seeing a lot of discussion over what's the right balance between social space and focus space, because what we do know, firms that have moved into agile working, the reason you come into the workplace, the office itself, is because it's the social interaction, it's the collaboration, and that actually takes up more space than if you come in just to sit at a desk for the 8 hours that you're in the office. So rebalancing social interactive space with focus space is in the short term what we're looking at for many organisations, and then in the long term looking at repositioning their full real estate portfolios to respond to that.
That's really interesting, isn't it? So it's not about not having space, it's about just using the space more creatively in the way that people want to work, which makes perfect sense. And I guess, Suzannah, coming to you, the construction industry is kind of unique, and it's been probably in the headlines more in many ways than we have as an industry before, because of course construction kind of carried on through the whole thing. So I think it'd be really interesting for you to share the kind of dichotomy of how construction businesses are having to work right now and what that might mean going forward.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. It's quite interesting seeing it from both sides. So construction hasn't stopped since March. Some companies took that pause, but for a lot of people, there was no option to work from home. And once we confirmed that construction was open, people continued to go to their workplaces. And there was a bit of dip in output and lots of concerns, but they quickly found their groove. And the trick was having some clear, consistent working practices. We had that in the site operating procedures. So they've now been doing this for what, 7-8 months have we been sitting here, and they found their groove and their way of working, and they learned as they went along and shared a lot of best practice. And the calls you mentioned, the real value was people quickly learned what was working and what wasn't. And we have to do that with the offices. We're all trying to second guess what that looks like, what going back looks like, because we've been at home, and we need to find our own groove of going back into the office. We've all spent the beginning March, April adapting. Then we all had a lovely summer, so actually everybody really enjoyed working at home. And now I think everyone's just a bit fed up and would do anything to get back into the office. And I know that I feel like that. I think we have to look at the office offers different things for different people. We've talked a lot about people's individual circumstances at home, what they need from the office. Some functions need more than the other. And I think we'll start to think differently. It will no longer be a 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, I'm in the office. It will be, what am I going to the office to do? If I'm going into the office to sit at my desk and do Zoom calls all day, it's not a good use of my time to travel in by train. But if I'm going in to collaborate because I want that company, because I want to share those ideas, then you'll structure your day accordingly. So I think we're going to be much smarter at looking at what we need those offices for, and then create the environment around them. And I'm quite relaxed. I'm in the same position. We have an office constructed by ISG, and I don't quite know what it's going to look like. And when my team say, well, how are we going to go back? I'm saying, let's not worry about that. Let's start to go back. We'll start to find what works, what days people want to be in, what really helps us keep that productivity and that enjoyment going. And then we'll build the framework around that as to how we're going to go going forward. So I think for us, it's less about worrying about what that office space looks like. It's about how once we start going back, how we keep people in that environment. What do we want? What does it look like? And we won't really find that out until we start to get back. And that's not going to be for at least a couple of months, I think, looking at it. Yeah. So I think we have a lot to learn looking at construction and say, let's not worry too much about it. It is going to be different, and we'll start to work that out and share best practice, and we'll make it different when we go back.
Great. And just listening to everything you said there, Suzannah, a couple of observations for me would be, I think construction learned some efficiencies through actually having to work in a different way. It made everyone look at their operating procedures. And I think, you know, we've gotten a bit smarter as an industry as a result of all this happening. And then the other thing, you know, talking about we're all desperate and you saying, you know, you're keen to get back into the office. That's something I read the other day. Is that if we have Teams calls or Zoom calls like we're doing right now, and you do that all day, you can actually only read around 10% of the body language of the individual. And the reason we all feel so exhausted at the end of the day is that actually we've just exhausted ourselves trying to interpret the other 90%. So it's but yes, yeah, very different working from home all the time, and I'm sure we'll be pleased to get back in the office. And this actually a really neat segue into what I want to ask, because what we found in the survey was that if when we asked employers and employees, they actually were pretty focused on, we want to be in the office 2 or 3 days. That feels about right. And actually, what really interested me was that the audience that wanted to be in the office the most was actually the employees. They were edging towards the 3 days, with employers more in the 2.5 days. And I guess if I come to you, Lee, I don't know if you find those statistics surprising or.
Yeah, Richard, it doesn't surprise me at all, actually, and I agree totally with what Suzannah just touched on there. But, you know, this clearly shows that while employees know the benefits of working from home, so doing so for an extended period of time has its consequences and drawbacks. So I guess we know the perks from remote working. So there's more time for yourself, with your families, saving money, and feeling trusted by your employer. And these were all verified in the research and the data that we've had come back, Richard. So, but before the pandemic hit, I think it's probably fair to discuss and debate that industries are already focusing on rationalising their estates to save money, and anticipation of more location flexible workforce. So we're already prepping for this in some way, shape or form. I guess if we look at it in more detail, you know, the verification shows that we know, we can understand there's little disparity between perspectives of employers and employees now. The gap is quite close. So if businesses are revising their workplace strategies, there are mutual benefits for both parties that can support the business and their performance and growth together, working together. But, you know, I think it's worth just saying as well, before I pass over to Caroline, that it's interesting finding out that almost a third of younger generations said working from home makes them less productive, experienced less by older generations. But this is likely due to younger people having, you know, the lack of quality in terms of working space, and they see that the workplace and coming to is a springboard, not only that for their own performance, but their own careers and sort of collaborating with their peers. So to go back to your question, like I said, I'm not surprised that employees want to be back in the office nearly 3 days a week. But when working alongside colleagues, it's not the only key to connection, but it's also their own development too.
Yeah, I agree, Lee, and you can't help but think, particularly for people that are in shared houses, the separation of work and home must be really complex, you know, because you probably don't have a dedicated office, and I don't, and I'm sitting in my back room now, so people don't have a dedicated office, and suddenly they're trying to balance, you know, having time where they finish work and they don't always feel like they're in the office. That's That's really interesting. I'd be interested, Caroline, to see you know, what you think on this issue, and is this a generational thing, or yeah, what are you discovering?
It is a very generational thing. I mean, what we find is that still the younger generation that are in the workplace do want the flexibility. They do want some element of flexibility. So they don't want to be the ones that are in 5 days a week just because of the status that they might, the trainees, the graduates, the apprentices, and so forth. They do want some of that work-life balance, but for understandably for them, the home situation is just not as conducive to working from home. The mentorship, the social life that you get from being with your colleagues is missed considerably, and we can't underestimate that, you know, the value of the networks that people build at that age in life. It will last them the rest of their working careers, and to miss out on that is a huge detriment to their progression. And so the across the, when we look with work with a client, we do look very closely at the demographics, and we do see it's that it's probably those in the most senior positions that are actually the most comfortable working from home. They've usually got the right setup, they've got extra space in their house, and they've already got the network that they can call on to brainstorm, to collaborate, and they don't feel uncomfortable about doing that. But there's a drop off in satisfaction as you go down through the ages, and especially younger people who are at home with younger families. It was very challenging for a lot of people in the time when the schools were closed. So that's one of the things that drawing people back into the office space is important to do. And it has to operate like a university for some people. It has to operate like a school or a social club, because that for all of us is an important part of our working lives. So part of the redesign or relook of that is looking at the strategies. How can we make sure we've got mentoree facilities within the workspace? How does that equate into the virtual workspace? So I know number of teams will keep live team channels open, so they're always working with somebody else that they can speak to just in the same way as they do in the office. And we're looking at, you know, how do you create the same experience when you're in meeting rooms? So when you have some people in the room, other people virtually, like we are, and how do you keep that parity in experience? How do you create that? Because like you were saying, we miss out on body language, the nuances of expression and joking and the side conversations that go on and get all missed. And likewise, if we're doing a meeting like this and you're the one person sat in a big, deep meeting room back in the office, you're missing out as well. So there's two sides to the argument, and I think part of it is the way that we design space, part of it is the way that we operate space, and the third element is always the technology within the space as well.
Okay, yeah, and what you say really rings true with me, because I think it's not just if half the people are in the office and half of the people at home. It's almost the chat that happens just before the meeting and the chat that happens just after the meeting for the people that are in the office that is the bit that you feel you've missed out on, because you know those things are going to be happening, and somehow not being part of almost the debrief, you're left with a question mark in your head. So there's definitely a bit of missing out there. I guess, Suzannah, if I come to you, I think about the construction industry and the need to be on site. Are we seeing, it's sort of a male-dominated industry, but also, you know, that need to be on site? Are we seeing any more agility, or are there any more opportunities for underrepresented groups in construction as a result of what's happening?
Absolutely, and I think it was Lee who said we were already starting to look at better working patterns and more flexibility or agility. People use different terminology, and we at Build UK were doing a project, or we still are doing a project with Timewise, funded by the CITV, to look at how we can have more flexibility in on-site roles, which is always the tricky bit to crack. We've got it at certain levels in offices, and what the last 7 or 8 months has done is just massively open people's minds to this can be done. Whereas before, construction was a very 7 till 7 operation. You know, I'm from site background as an engineer. You were out on site at 7 o'clock in the morning, pouring concrete often until 7 o'clock at night, and that was just the way it worked. And I think that's always been one of the challenges to our diversity and inclusion programme, because that just is impossible for people who have a home to run, who have caring responsibilities. A family these days where both parents or both people work makes that just almost impossible. So we've kind of hung ourselves there. So we were looking at that project, and what this has done is opened everybody's mindset to it. So I think it will tick that box in women coming into the industry and other people who've not looked at construction before. I think one of the challenges we also have to look at, though, and we've talked about the younger generation, is they have always asked why our generation haven't been more flexible. And I think when you explore that, they want to come and go as they please, or some people want to just come and go as you please. And we know that doesn't work. That doesn't work for the business. What I think we'll be able to find now is that framework in between. You need a framework. It might be core hours. It might be, as Caroline says, that you're not expected to turn up at the office on Friday, so nobody's left there on their own, you know, buying their own coffee. But that structure and that framework works for everybody. It allows that crossover of people. And they want to come to the same place at the same time. So you need those rules of engagement. So I think there's a massive opportunity here. And what the pandemic has done is just accelerated us by 5 years. So actually, it's a real opportunity for us to say, we're not going back to what it was before. We've gone past that comfort zone to sink back into it. We have to look at what really works for everybody going forward. So I find it quite exciting. I find it a real opportunity for construction, both in the office, but also out on sites. And the final point to pick up there, you mentioned about sites being more efficient. And you know what? They've had to be more organised. We've had to plan ahead, because with social distancing, you can't have the same amount of people on site. But we found about 3 months in, when we measured our contractors' output rather than productivity, that they were back up to pre-pandemic levels of output, because they just found smarter and better ways of working, particularly in infrastructure where they've got bigger open sites. You add on to that our modern methods of construction, you add on to that our better processes and the way we've been able to operate. This is huge. The potential for construction is absolutely enormous. We've just got to reach out and grab it.
Okay. That's great, Suzannah, and really encouraging, you know, that there are some upsides in this. And I guess, Phil, if I can come to you, I think of BT as a very big employer, and with a range of obviously generational workforces within that employer, and also a really broad range of functions. So just going back to the original question of how do we get that blend of being in the office, not being in the office, how is that affecting BT, and what are your plans around that?
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I mean, there's probably in BT no right or wrong universal answer to this one for us. You know, we've had to sort of personalise the workplace, you know, to deal with different roles in different parts of our organisation. You know, an example, 40% of our business is through contact centres and through, you know, customer centres. And you know, during the lockdown, you know, lockdown number one, you know, we had to adapt and trust our guys. You know, it was complete lockdown. We had to shift people out of the centres, out of offices very, very quickly, and make sure that they were all digitally connected and kept our customer base, you know, going. And in terms of, you know, additional requests and everything else that comes through the sort of contact centres, you know, during this, you know, sort of second wave, it's been a bit more patchwork quilt, where we've had to learn to live with it in some respects, but also, you know, as you know, we've talked to, and Suzannah says, you know, we've grasped the opportunity to change the way we think, change the way we do things, change the way we we construct and develop things, and it's been a great platform for us, so within that environment to support our people a lot better, ensuring they have the needs, it's the cleaners come in when they're meant to come in, they're there continuously, with the maintenance work, the infrastructure programs are done at the right times and changed. If I go to things like our operation centres, where these are key areas that we need to keep live. We run they run the NHS. We run a third of the country's network. We have to keep it live and keep it running. And it's been a great opportunity to do a bit of culture and shift change within the construction workforce, where we've not stuck to some core hours now. So we're big infrastructure pieces. We developed we would almost work like the NHS work in shift patterns, where it was more flexible for those construction workers. Through the childcare they were having to deal with, through the the flexibility they've had, and they've embraced that actually, and it's been very quite refreshing that they've worked with us in that, and there was no we only work from 9 till 5. There was a certain shift change. The travel was a problem for them. Now they get on the trains at less peak times, so they feel a lot safer. So we just looked at that examples, and other things. One of the things we spoke about a lot is the 999 centres. We run all the 999 centres. We have to keep them live, but we can't do that from home. Those things have to be done within the office, so we have to create those safe havens, because there can be difficult calls on these 999 contact centres. They need the proper training, they need the mentoring that comes from it as well. I think what we were sort of worried around was the losing the sense of change, where the representation of our brand was being lost as well, because you were at home. You weren't getting the right training, you weren't aligned with the organisation and how it wanted to go forward and how it wanted to transition. So that brings itself questions around the loyalty, success and the talent, and how we retain our staff. And I think all these aspects that we've built in around personalisation and looking at changing our patterns and changing the way we're thinking has really helped us adapt. And I hope that the people see that we are trying to make change for the better and also protect the well-being of our people.
Yeah, no, that all sounds great, and you certainly hear that in the contact centre world. There's trying to do that job from home, and particularly when it's a critical role like the one you described, must be virtually impossible. So I guess the other thing that for me, and if I can ask all the panelists, we've got a couple more questions I want to get through to try and be as concise as possible, so we can take some of the questions from people that are tuning into this. But one I'd like to ask is there is a sort of perceived wisdom that actually post-COVID-19 people are really going to review where they live, and I guess there was always the kind of thought of, if I want to succeed in my career, I've got to be in a major metropolis, be that London, Birmingham, Manchester, Glasgow, or wherever else. And I kind of wonder if we think that's going to change in terms of people's personal choices, and also what organisations need to do to make sure they're in the right place to attract that absolute A-grade talent that everybody wants. I think, Phil, sorry if I can just come directly back to you, it would be really interesting to know how you are tackling that conundrum in BT.
I suppose, and this is probably my opinion, maybe not so much the BT opinion, but I think people are changing their mindset about living and breathing everything London. I think people are we've got to pursue talent, and that may be outside of London, and that's where we're looking at from a transformation programme, where London will always be there. It's the centre of the UK, but we need to ensure that we can allow for the balance and the flexibility that they can use other locations, and we can match that skill sets around the country. So it's still, I think, a little bit immature for us to understand what that really means, but I think more and more people enjoy the greenery that was outside of London. Those that in lockdown who had the beach on their doorstep and could go walk in the woods, as opposed to those who were stuck in their one-bedroom flats in London. I think some people will be having a little bit of a thought process as whether that's right for them anymore, and if there is that flexibility and their skills can be used elsewhere within the hubs within BT, then that might be the right option for them to think about that.
Yeah, great. And I find that really interesting to see, what that does, and whether actually the London office has just become a different kind of space, the collaboration space, or but all of that will play out in time. Caroline, if I can come to you, and just building on what Phil said, the organisations that you're working with, are you seeing them start to analyse their geographies and come to some different opinions?
Yeah, definitely the London office is being looked at in detail. I mean, I think for a number of years now, organisations have looked at London and for the headquarters and kept a flat headcount and a flat space requirement in London because it's become so expensive and difficult to justify. And with the offshoring of either back office staff and so forth into cheaper areas. So London's sort of victim of its own success in that respect, and it's a circular process because London went into decline after the war, and the 60s and 70s saw a decline in London, and it was only into the 80s we started to see it pick back up. But we're seeing organisations really challenged. How big does our central HQ need to be? Where does it need to be? And probably looking at a downsizing of that central HQ facility, but also starting to grapple with questions over if we have a dispersed workforce. Are we coming into what's the tax implications of that? If people are working over in different regions, different countries, what are the cybersecurity issues around all of these questions? And these were questions where the ad hoc person doing it in the past was fine, it got sort of dealt with, but now looking at organisations having to take these things into consideration on a much larger scale, we're starting to see red flags being raised left, right and centre around these sort of issues, and potentially we'll start to see more legislation around this and more cross-border agreements as bigger organisations push forward with a more dispersed workforce. We're also seeing, just on a side note, we're seeing that in the co-working space, we're seeing a much greater inquiry levels in suburbs and smaller, what used to be dormitory towns. So the co-working spaces are seeing a huge take-up, rise of inquiries there. So as people want the office infrastructure, but don't necessarily want to travel into the city centres.
Yeah, sure. No, that makes perfect sense. And I guess, Lee, in terms of looking at the pipeline for companies like ISG, are you seeing any changes in the sort of geographical pattern of that?
Yeah, I must say, Richard, I do agree with what Phil and Caroline just touched on, but this level of change is something that it just definitely won't happen overnight. And I think with so much economic uncertainty, both employees and employers have a joint focus on sustained return to growth. I think the war on talent still exists. I think we're all still fighting for the best people in our sectors in the industry. So forward-thinking companies will be looking to create spaces that appeal to the world's most diverse and talented people. I think that hasn't changed. I think the data shows that it's highlighted that over a third suggests that they will be more likely to leave their employer if they didn't have the right level of work-flex balance that they want in the right environment, potentially to work to. I guess so. My message would be that organisations should take this opportunity probably to consider how they diversify their location strategy from a medium to long-term view. Headquarters, I think, will remain as strongholds for traditional business in cities, but now we've got the opportunity really to explore how companies could pursue operations in other regions. I think there's a greater mix of users and more use in regional spaces overhaul. But I think then the regional spaces, then potentially these spaces have got to be brought up to spec that gives the same level of attraction to the same level of talented people. So I think nothing's changes in terms of the battle for talent and what that looks like. I just believe there could be a shift in employer sentiment, and employer begin to see the benefit of following employees potentially rather than the other way around. And I think only that way we'll maintain the best talent in our industry and sectors.
Okay, and I guess just coming to you lastly, Suzannah, obviously the construction industry, that there is, Lee refers to the sort of war for talent, and there is scarce resource, particularly in certain roles. So are you seeing this geographical shift have any kind of effect on construction employees or construction companies, Suzannah?
I think because construction's continued to work, that actually in terms of that diversification, we haven't seen so much of that. Although with Brexit, you know, and there's just something like 50 odd days until the end of the transition period, I think that will have a greater impact on construction. And I think amongst all of this, we've got to recognise, and Phil touched on it, some jobs will always need to be done on location. You know, you can't drive a plane, you can't fly a plane, or you can't from your back bedroom, not at the moment anyway. You know, you can't pour concrete, you can't put a scaffolding out on a construction project from your own home. That is definitely a team sport, and it's on location. And that will always be the case, and that suits very many people. That's actually what they want to do. What this has done is opened our eyes to what is possible. It's not going to be 100% everybody's going to change, but there are a lot of areas, a lot of roles that can change, and I'm always keen to focus on what can be done and not so much worry about those ones that are working as they are. We all need good people, and this offers that huge opportunity to get people into our industry, on site, in offices that wouldn't normally apply for those particular roles, whether it's because of the travel, whether it's because it's the flexibility. I think we're also all a bit more aware of the demands of people's lives. I think I'm looking into your kitchen right now, which is a space that you normally only let your nearest and dearest into. We've had kids, you know, my dog is regularly up here. I've had to pop out and do some filming for my husband at lunchtime. So we're all much more aware and much kinder about what we have going on outside work. So we're much more, you know, somebody now says I've got to go and pick the kids up. It's kind of, I get that, we've all been there. The other opportunity is I would now employ somebody in Newcastle and say, oh, can you come down for 1 day a week, longer day, slightly more expensive train fare, but the other 4 days stay in your own home or work locally. As Caroline said, let's find a workplace locally if getting out the office, because we've had to do that. If you asked me in February if I would employ somebody in Newcastle, I'd say I just can't work out how that works. I can do that with bells on now, that's quite clear. So I keep coming back to, this is an opportunity. There are sometimes massive things happen in our life, and it's how we respond to them. And this is a massive thing. For me personally, the blend is going to be really good. I've got a teenage daughter, and she said to me the other day, one of the really nice things is I get to have tea with you every day. And actually, I've not looked at it like that from a teenager. I am going to take that if she sees that as a good thing. But that will apply to everybody. You're doing something that gives you that better work-life balance. And I believe we're all better at the work if we've got that life balance as well. You can give 100% to each rather than trying to juggle in perhaps the way we were doing before.
Great. So we're running slightly, that's fantastic. Thank you, Suzannah. We're running slightly behind time. So I'm going to ask the panelists now for a kind of one-liner on the next question. Then we've had some questions that have come in from people that are dialed in, which is great. And I'd like to try and tackle at least one or two of those. So just a one or two liner on this, and I think it's the $50 million question, which is what's this actually mean? What do future workplaces look like when you go into them? How will they be different? And we've talked about, you know, purpose-built, single tenant or mixed use space or whatever that might be. So I guess my question is, how do we repurpose offices in a sustainable way? And I mean that in the truest sense of the word. You know, I think people have got different expectations from their workspace now around access to light, fresh air, all of those things. So Caroline, if I can come just come straight back to you, What are you seeing your clients kind of looking at for the future that is different as a result of what's happened?
Short term, preserving the cash, so not doing much apart from furniture moves. Long term, I see that health, well-being, very key, hugely key. So outdoor space, natural light, and making it different from home. The reason we like to explore as humans and are interested in going to places because they're different to where we spend 90% of our time. And so the workplace will need to look different to our home workplace to draw us into it and for us to go and explore, whatever that might be.
Yeah, and that's definitely going to be, doing things that you simply can't get done at home for sure. So that's great. And Suzannah, a one-liner from you on how you think workplaces might be different post-COVID.
I'd like to see the repurposing of our cities and our towns, so there's a better blend and a better mix of both. So the live work are much closer, so that commuting is reduced, which actually adds to our there's some questions in the chat about zero carbon. Less commuting, less travel, more walking, actually I think makes better environment and makes us all healthier and a better work-life balance.
Yeah, I think we'd all agree with that. Perfect. And Phil, maybe just a one-liner insight as to sort of the headline of what you've got, what you're doing in BT in terms of real changes to the office looking ahead. Phil, you may be on mute.
It's always difficult for me to give a one-liner, but I'll give it a go. We're just trying to make the working space, work harder. I mean, the space has got to work harder for our people, give them the right experience. And I think the experience comes down to 4 aspects of that. One is the design, the texture, colour, the lighting, the home environment. And then there's the connectivity. We've got to get the digitisation right in terms of giving people the flexibility around that, changing our behaviours, looking at the blend of viewpoints, and looking at our operatives and how we, not just those in the office, but those that work out in the field.
Brilliant. Okay, that's great. So thank you all for answering my questions. Now we've had some questions that have come in from people that are dialed in, and the first one is, was there a split? Oh, in the survey, was there a split between the public and the private sector responses? And I think, Lee, probably you're the only one with the inside view. So if I can ask you that question.
Yeah, absolutely. There were some 10,000 responses. So. But yeah, there were some interesting findings showing that 2/3 of the public sector respondents said that they believe they wouldn't have the same sense of team and friendship if they work from home all of the time. So that was really interesting in terms of the way that sector works. But this conflicted with the percentage of people who rated the workplace quality as acceptable or outstanding. So that was interesting finding in terms of the environment they work in. But it was significantly lower in the private sector. So again, different expectations in terms of the workspace.
Okay, thank you. And some really interesting ones that are coming through here. And thank you for everyone that's sending them through. But I think this one's really important to me personally, because ISG has a partnership with Mental Health UK, and mental health's a real issue in the construction industry. So I'm going to ask this one, which is, should employers be doing more to try and address the impact of the pandemic on workers' mental health? And I think, if it's all right, Suzannah, I'll come to you first on that.
That is such a broad question because it depends on the workplace, the employer, the employee. One of the key issues that has come out of the pandemic, which came out really early on, was about the mental health of everybody. And again, from construction, we saw 2 sides. It was actually really challenging for construction workers to go to work at the beginning. And I don't know if you recall, my heart actually races faster when I think back at the beginning. There were coffins left outside some contractors' workplaces. The construction workers were vilified in the street. Yes. And we worked really hard to change that narrative about construction workers were going to keep the economy going. So actually, that was really challenging on workers' mental health for going to work. And at the same time, you had a lot of people, some people really happy at home. Some people who are perhaps not in the best environment, or it is tricky, they're balancing on the end of a bed, they're fed up with their flatmates, they don't like their own family. It was challenging for other ways. As an employer, and I believe that's really the way I can look at it, for us, it was about constantly checking in with our team on a manager, employee level, through employees. We've had virtual coffee mornings, we've had tea mornings. Interestingly, about productivity and teamwork, I've got to know my team way better over the last 7 months. There's my one colleague, we are literally, he's my wingman for all our members' calls. We're constantly talking, so actually I think we know each other much better, and I've got to meet people like you, Richard, and Yuli, that I wouldn't have seen before. So it is a challenge. It is up to everybody to look after everybody else and to check in. The other challenge as an employer, you can ask and you can do your best. It's actually also, we do need our workforce to say, I need a bit of help here. And I think that's much more acceptable these days, to also say, I'm struggling, brilliant, I can help you. What can I do? What do you need? And we can do something about it. So that's very much, I believe, on an employer responsibility. That's part of being an employer, to look after your workforce.
Yeah, I agree. I can speak from personal experience on the focus there of being on people that are maybe, have been furloughed or other populations that have been affected. You talked about construction workers and the pressure on them and the feeling of the sort of public sentiment at the beginning of construction sort of going back to work. And we certainly had to do a lot of work on building mental health resources and resilience and all of that stuff. So I have another question. I think it's probably one for Phil and Caroline primarily, and this is around the sort of the ambition around net carbon zero, and whether we think that COVID-19 has taken attention away from that focus on achieving net carbon zero, be that by 2040, 2050, or whether this has actually been an opportunity to look at things all over again and accelerate that journey. And I don't know, I think, Caroline, if I come to you first, so you can just give that broad view of what you're hearing.
It's accelerated that journey, definitely. Firms can now see the potential that they can shift their employees' behaviours, bring in new culture that is going to support the ESG agenda and reach those targets. And on all the relocation strategies we're working on, it is number one. Any organisation that is looking to relocate at the moment is within the next 10 years, that is absolutely the number one priority, how they're evaluating the buildings that they're on the short list. So yes, I think it's only accelerated.
That's great. And Phil, I'm sure that obviously BT will have its own sustainability and carbon strategy, but in terms of your area of the business, how's it affected your sort of carbon neutral strategy? Has it kind of set it back, or are you looking at things afresh and it almost gives you a new opportunity to accelerate towards that net carbon zero ambition?
That was a meaty question. Yeah, from our point of view, I think building on what Caroline has said, we're accelerating it. I mean, if you had listened to, seen any of the end of year results this year, Philip Jansen made the commitments around, zero carbon, and he, increased funding as well to accelerate both the fibre refresh, which helps us reduce our operation of our buildings, which are not very user friendly. They eat up a lot of the environment through their usage and our not using more renewable energy as well, which has been a real key driver for us. So yeah, we've accelerated it, I think for the better. I think it gave us a little bit of a kick, and it's great to see the support of our chief executive, that's one of his main aims to the board and his commitment to the country.
Great. And just jumping back a couple of questions, Phil, just on that mental health thing, what kind of things did BT have to put in place to support people's mental health? I talked a bit about some of the things that ISG had done, but what kind of things were BT putting in place during the pandemic, which obviously we're still in, but during the last few months to, you know, ensure that people had the right kind of support?
Yeah, I mean, and interestingly, it was hit quite home when Suzannah was saying around, you know, the type of workforce. There was anxiety at the start. There was, we had to change the way people thought. You know, we were getting 5G masks were getting burned down because they thought that was the spread of COVID. You know, and the workers were getting, you know, harassed on the street. You know, the guys are just trying to keep the network running and keep people going at home. You know, and there was a sort of education that, you know, while they weren't NHS, the operatives were out in the field keeping the country live as such, you know, and I think that, you know, we can't play on that as much. In terms of support, I mean, I think BT have a fantastic support on mental health and well-being. They have programs, they have mentors, they have, you know, they have departments that look after, you know, each of our, you know, the contact centres, 999s, all these mental health. And I think from my point, from a personal point of view, similar to Suzannah, you know, I've only been in BT, you know, just over 18 months, and 8 months of that I've been in lockdown, you know, and it's been quite sporadic being able to see your teams, and we've came closer. You know, you get to, you understand your individuals, you get to, you know what makes them tick a bit more, you get a bit more personal with them. And I think, you know, we've made that a big agenda point, that we should continue to drive that agenda in terms of mental health across the board, because we don't know people's personal views and what's going on in the world and what's happening behind closed doors. And, you know, it's quite harrowing, some of the numbers that you sort of see within those, you know these call centres and things that goes on. So mental health's massive for BT, just as any other initiatives that are out there, and the agendas are out there, really supportive, and it's really good to know that that's what they see as the future.
Bill, I mean, in my take, you know, I think there's certainly an awareness piece of where years ago maybe that it was frowned upon maybe for people to, you know, to talk about things, having a gateway to be able to come and talk that. And I think that's sort of a paradigm shift of just society now, that you can open and make that change for people. And certainly in ISG's business here, we've had a recent world champion boxer, and I won't name names, that come to do a talk, who went through that same experience in his own life to the workforce, you know. And again, that was really powerful in terms of someone who's experienced that, and a workforce of potentially 300 or 400 people just to witness, sit down and listen and engage and share that experience. So I think there's still work to do, but it's on the top of our agenda from a board perspective.
Okay, yeah, I completely endorse what you've just said. I think, and for the construction industry, it's a particular challenge because it tends to be male dominated, and people keep things in, and unfortunately, you know, it is a real challenge in the construction industry. But you can just feel it opening up, and I think another good that might come out of COVID-19 will be that discussion, you know, we've all realised even more than we did before that we need to open up that discussion and encourage people to speak. So I've got one more question I think I'll take, and this is a really interesting one. How much, I think, Caroline, I think I'll probably aim it at you first, but how much do you think we will need to curate people's days to ensure they're using their time in the office effectively? I'm not going to add anything to that person's question. I'd be interested in your views.
I think human behaviour, we won't need to curate people's time. I think people like routine. Absolutely, like majority of people like routine. There's the old extroverts that like to completely mess around with their days, but the majority of us like that routine, and it will be you know, the natural patterns of how we use space will become apparent. I don't think we'll have to you know, keep off the grass signs up and things like that, you know, or ring a bell at lunchtime to tell people that they've got to stop working now. You know, we are adults, and I think if you just give, there are cues that you can give in space. You know, we do quaint little things like make library areas and things like that feel like libraries, so people lower their voices. You know, we sort of create a social buzz by raising the ceiling and allowing allowing it to look more like a cafe space. So there are social cues we're all used to, and I think that will continue, and we won't need to start dictating to people, this hour is spent doing your emails followed by 2 hours of collaboration.
No, okay. Of course, yeah, that makes perfect sense. So I think what I'm going to do is say thank you to all of the panelists and just try and summarise what we've talked about today. So for me, I think we've established, and I think the research paper establishes, this is most certainly not the end of the workplace. The workplace is here to stay. It's a good investment in people, and I think probably now more than ever in some ways, we've got clearly a responsibility for people and their well-being, and the workplace offers a really great alternative from home. And we talked about the generational aspects of that, and people in shared houses, and the social and networking aspects of that for people when they go into the workplace that are simply irreplaceable in terms of home working. So definitely then there's some uncertainty on the journey we're going on. I don't think we've established all the answers today. I think definitely some of the broad parameters. So I think for all employers, what I'm hearing is a need for really open communication with employees and the willingness to be agile. And then definitely workplaces that are done right, they really do knit people together and give a sense of community that, again, you simply can't get from a Teams call, and that blend is where we all work effectively. And I think generally those are the topics that we've looked at. I think I'm hearing from Caroline, from Susan, all four panelists, that definitely there's an openness to doing things differently, but there are aspects of what we did before that will always be valuable, and we might just do them slightly differently in the future. So I think if I can just say to all of the four panelists, Suzannah, Caroline, Phil and Lee, thank you so much for contributing so openly and willingly. I think everyone would have enjoyed your contribution and learnt something from this session, I hope. So thank you. And then next step. So everyone that's on this call, we will send you our full research report, the one we've been referring to, the Power of Place, in the follow-up communication. So you'll get that, and I think you'll find that really interesting, sort of, because we talked to, as Lee said, I think around 10,000 or more individuals as well as companies. You're going to find that data really interesting to benchmark yourself, in terms of employee sentiment. So hopefully that will be, that'll be something you'll really value when you get that, and you can share it with your HR people and your facilities people, and it will help you strategize about the future. When we come back to you, we'll also have a recording of today's event. So if you want to share that with anybody, of course you can. And then, although we got through quite a lot of the questions, if you've still got a burning question, again, as I said at the beginning, if you can send that through to email@isgltd.com, I can always go back to the panelists and help to form an answer for you, and I'll be very happy to do that. So then the next thing that we're going to be doing as an organisation is a sustainable buildings monitor report, which is really around cities and whether cities, and we talked about net carbon zero, etc., how prepared are individual cities for a net carbon zero future and a sustainable building future. So we're working on that at the moment, and that's going to come out soon, and we may well do another one of these Smart Series webinars on that particular topic. So I think that probably brings us pretty much to a close. So thank you for attending. Please take care, everyone. Stay safe, keep well, and I hope you found today useful, and I wish you all the very best. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Richard.